in and share a little bit. There's always that moment where I'm like, I don't want to hit the leave meeting button when this happens. Anyone else panic like that when that happens? You're like, I don't want to be that person who just ducks out. It has happened once before while I was leading a training, and I was so embarrassed. So I'm so grateful that that didn't happen. So I'm going to dive in and share just a quick zoomed out overview of Keshet. So as I mentioned, I'm Jamie. I use she, her pronouns. I'm Keshet's Director of Youth Programs. And so Keshet is a national organization that works for the full equality of LGBTQ Jews and our families in Jewish life. And we do that through 4 primary programmatic angles. One of them is through community mobilization. So this is grassroots and national campaigns to forward LGBTQ rights here in the US. Another angle is through education and training. That fabulous team is represented here by our very own Tracy Lapgold. And the education and training team fosters LGBTQ belonging in our Jewish communities. So in our day schools, our synagogues, our JCCs, federations, and what have you, by really meeting organizations where they're at and communities where they're at and bringing them along a journey of learning to, like I said, to foster LGBTQ belonging in your communities. The third programmatic angle, which is my absolute favorite, is through our youth program. So we work with about 1,200 LGBTQ and ally Jewish youth throughout the US and some folks tuning in from abroad. And we define youth as folks between the ages of 13 and 24, even though morally and spiritually, I do not agree with that limitation for youth. I think we are all young. And we work with those youth through a variety of community building opportunities, from weekend retreats to online affinity spaces to getting to come to amazing conventions like BBYO IC and hosting affinity space there and working with their incredible leaders. And then the fourth programmatic angle is held by our JOC programs manager. And this is all about fostering community building opportunities and content creation opportunities for LGBTQ Jews of color. That's Keshet in a nutshell. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to the wonderful Tracy.
Thank you so much, Jamie. Hi, everyone. As was said, my name is Tracy Labgold. My pronouns are she, her, and I am Keshet's Florida Education and Training Manager. And I just wanted to lead us through a quick conversation around our Kava Note this evening before we get started. Our Kava Note are our intentions that we bring to this space when we are together. And so while some of you might be incredibly new to the topic of LGBTQ plus inclusion in Jewish life, and some of you may be very well versed in it, I believe that when we're together in a space, there's always an opportunity for growth and learning if we come with that curiosity and that desire to learn more. And then to trust intent and tend impact. Sometimes when we're learning new vocabulary or we're talking about identities, we might open our mouths and say something and it doesn't come out quite the way we intended. And we will trust your intent. I often like to speak about we're speaking in rough draft, right? We're learning together. So we'll know that you meant well. But if it should be that you say something that doesn't come out quite the way you meant it, we also ask that you apologize. Prepare for non-closure. We have just a little bit of time with you this evening to cover a very deep and vast topic. So we'll get through as much as we can, and then we know there's more learning ahead for all of us. And then hopefully we can also have some fun. So hopefully we can all agree to abide by these intentions. I see some nods. I appreciate that. Thank you so much. And we will go on with our program.
So before we dive into the practical actions that we can all be taking on in our own lives to really show up for the LGBTQ young folks in our communities and in our families, I want to invite us to take a little bit of a journey through some of the statistical landscape of LGBTQ plus youth mental health right now, or at least in very recent years. And I want to, just name that some of these statistics are pretty heavy. And so I invite you to take the breaths you need, drink the water that you need, do whatever you need to feel grounded as we share some of what we understand from some of the very comprehensive research that is out there on LGBTQ youth mental health. And we can go to the next slide. So I'm going to read these out loud, and you're welcome to read along as well. So nearly 1 in 3 LGBTQ plus youth, this was in the Trevor Project's national survey on LGBTQ mental health, which surveys over 30,000 LGBTQ young folks. They also identified the demographic as 24 and under. So nearly 1 in 3 of those respondents said that their mental health was poor most of the time or always due to anti-LGBTQ policies and legislation. Nearly 2 in 3 LGBTQ plus youth said that hearing about potential state or local laws banning people from discussing LGBTQ people at school made their mental health a lot worse. 6 out of 10 of the respondents said that someone attempted to convince them to change their sexual orientation or gender identity. 75% of trans youth reported that they feel unsafe at school, and only 38% of respondents reported that their home is affirming. You can go to the next slide. This is from a different survey this was actually based on a sample size from 2015 from the US Transgender Survey, and this actually isn't about, this first statistic is not specifically focused on trans respondents. This was from yet another research study that was quoted in that from general population. So this is inclusive of cisgender and straight youth and LGBTQ youth, but 15% of youth overall reported seriously considering attempting suicide in the past year in this study that was conducted in 2020. And then going back to the Trevor Project survey, 41% of LGBTQ plus youth, by comparison, seriously considered attempting suicide in the past year, including more than half of trans and non-binary youth. And within that, breaking that down a little bit across other identities, 40% of trans folks attempt suicide by the age of 25. 47% of Black LGBTQ plus youth seriously considered attempting suicide in the past year. So that's an increase of 6%. And then from a survey that was taken from intakes that were hosted by JQI, another national organization that works specifically with Jewish LGBTQ youth, primarily from Orthodox, Hasidic, Sephardic, and other conservative communities, shared that, or they learned that over 70% of the folks whose intakes they performed reported thoughts of suicide. So that's specifically of Orthodox Jewish LGBTQ youth. And we can go to the next slide. I actually want to invite us to take a breath real quick. So if you could just breathe in and out, because I know at least for me, those are, and I'm sure for all of you, those are really heavy statistics to read and are very heartbreaking in many different ways. And it's important that even when we are reading and trying to comprehend what this might mean, what we know it does not mean is that LGBTQ youth are inherently prone to mental health challenges and suicide risk because of their sexual orientation or gender identity. This is not what that means. This is not what these statistics tell us, because that is not true. Rather, we are often at higher risk of experiencing mental health challenges and suicide risk because of how we are mistreated and stigmatized in society. Now, that is both heartbreaking, but also there is something uplifting about it, because to me, that says that we actually have the power to change it for the positive. We have the power as members of society to change society and control our behaviors in ways that actually do not stigmatize, but rather uplift and celebrate LGBTQ identities. So there's something about this that is actually very empowering. And with that, we can move to the next slide. LGBTQ youth who report having at least one accepting adult in their lives were 40% less likely to report a suicide attempt in the past year. That's one adult having huge impact on a young person's life. And just looking around like this Zoom room and looking at everyone's faces and folks' names, this is a Zoom room filled with adults who are ready and eager and taking precious time out of our evenings to learn how to do exactly this, to learn how to be accepting and supportive. That is massively powerful. And I know that if I had known as a teen that there could be a group like this, spending your time this way, it would have made a world of difference to me. And with that, we can go to the next slide. So some more uplifting statistics about the power we actually hold. Actually, yeah, there we go. Sorry, my screen is glitching a little bit. So if you see me staring a little confusedly, it keeps going from purple to blue, but which is beautiful and aesthetically pleasing, but not helpful. So 78% of respondents reported having access to at least one in-person LGBTQ affirming space. We can imagine that those spaces also include affirming adults. 86% of LGBTQ plus youth reported having high levels of support from at least one person. And having one affirming adult in their lives who uses the correct names and pronouns reduces a trans person's risk of attempting suicide by over 56%. So that gives us a deeper glimmer into, hey, being that accepting adult, not only impacting someone's risk of attempting suicide, but also being an accepting adult who does these two things, respecting names and pronouns, that massively reduces a trans person's risk of attempting suicide by over 50%, 56%. That is huge. And so I hope that we can, while we might hold some of the heartbreak from the statistics I shared earlier, I also hope we can hold on to some of the hope and power of knowing that we actually have the ability to make a massively positive difference in young folks' lives. And back to you, Tracy.
Thank you so much, Jamie. I like to think a lot about the Jewish value, pikuah nefesh, right? This idea that this is life-saving work, and we are doing this work together with you, and that brings us a lot of hope and joy as well. Oh, did you, Jamie, want to talk about this, or do you want me to skip to the next slide?
Just knowing that time is precious, I'll just share really quickly without us even having these quotes. We can send them to you in a different context, but I want to share that some of the statistics we have from our own affinity spaces for youth have shown us that after participating in a Keshet program, 96% reported feeling more at ease and confident in their LGBTQ and Jewish identities, with the other 4% saying that they already feel like they've peaked in terms of their confidence and ease in their identities. And 100% reported that they felt more connected to LGBTQ Jewish community. And probably most fascinating was that over 75% reported a stronger desire to engage in other Jewish communal opportunities that were not just Keshet. So there was something tied to there about feeling more eager, more confident to go into other spaces where they might not necessarily feel like they can expect the same degree of LGBTQ belonging, but feeling more confident to give it a shot. And that's what we all want. We want them to be more engaged and be more connected and continue to feel proud of their Jewish connections and identities. And back to you, Tracy.
Thank you so much, Jamie. So we've started the conversation by really addressing the real need and importance of doing this work. And, that work comes with some education. So this is a bit of the vocabulary section of the evening. I want to cover some terms and concepts related to LGBTQ plus identity. We will not quiz you on the vocabulary at the end, I promise. But it is important to us that you get a sense of some of the language around these identities, around our identities. And if we are going to save time at the end for Q&A, but if there is a clarifying question about a term, or you'd like me to repeat something maybe in a different way, or when I get very excited, I speak very quickly. So if you want me to slow down a little bit, feel free to to chat Rebecca a clarifying question or a comment that we can address in this portion. And then again, we'll address more in-depth questions at the end. So I want to start by talking about 3 aspects of our identities. And it's really important to me to name that each one of us has all 3 of these aspects of our identities. And we also know that we're multifaceted human beings with many, many, many parts of our identities. But for the purposes of this conversation tonight, we're really going to focus just on these 3. So the 3 are sex assigned at birth, gender identity, and sexual orientation. So sex assigned at birth is when a baby is born and somebody outside of that baby, a nurse, a technician, maybe it's on a sonogram before the baby is born, but somebody, not the baby itself, looks at that baby's body and announces that that baby is a boy or a girl. And about 1.5% of the time, babies are born intersex, or humans are born intersex, where they have some kind of combination of reproductive organs and genitalia that we might typically think of as male or female. They have some kind of combination of those organs or body parts. And there's not one way to be intersex. It does show up in a whole variety of ways and just proves to us the miraculous amazingness of the human body, that we do come out in so many different forms and variations, and also reminds us, right, that not all bodies are born along that typical binary that we think of as male or female.
Happy birthday.
And so, oh, my Alexa decided to contribute to the conversation. I don't know if you could hear that, but clearly she wants to be part of our discussion. So I just used the word binary. And so I wanted to just step back a minute and make sure that we're familiar with this term, right? So bi is a Latin prefix that means two. If you've ever ridden a bicycle, you're familiar with this concept. And it's really the idea that we can sort everything into two categories. So we often think of as opposite or mutually exclusive. And one of the reason that we sort things into these categories is really to make an easy way for our brain to sort all of the data that it encounters every minute of every day. And oftentimes those categories work really well for us, but oftentimes they also fall short. So we often talk about thinking about things we typically would think of as opposites from each other. We often will talk about people being cat people or dog people, right? That's a very common binary we hear referred to. Well, in our house, we have two pet guinea pigs. We are neither cat people nor dog people, and we love our guinea pigs very, very much. And that's just it's a silly reminder that life is just too messy and too complicated to fall totally neatly exactly into opposites. And in that same way, I want us to think about human beings being way too vast and varied. A reminder, right, that we just talked about intersex identity as another way that human beings show up in the world, that we are just too, we're just too nuanced, too complicated, too messy to fall entirely into the binary. So how does that relate to the conversation that we were having a minute ago when I showed you a version of this triangle? When we talk about sex assigned at birth, we often talk about male and female. But when we talk about gender, we have an opportunity to really go beyond that binary and understand the way that we relate to ourselves in a much broader and more complex and more nuanced way. So if sex assigned at birth is something that somebody outside of the human body might look at the human body and make a classification or a characterization about, gender identity is an internal sense of self. It is how somebody understands themselves to be, specifically in relationship to their gender. And when somebody's sex assigned at birth, let me give an example. My sex assigned at birth is female, and I identify as a woman. So I would be, you can see on the side of the triangle, this line that connects the two axes, right? I would be considered, I am a cisgender person. Cis is a Latin prefix that means on the same side, because my sex assigned at birth is in alignment with my gender identity. And if I'm somebody who has experienced my life where my sex assigned at birth is in alignment with my gender identity, sometimes it's hard to understand how that might not be true for some people. And even so, if that is something that happens to you, where you're not really sure you could understand how somebody's gender and sex assigned at birth might not be in alignment, what I would encourage you to do is not to worry so much about the how or the why, but understand and recognize that this experience is true for many people, and that we need to honor each person's experience so that they can show up and thrive and succeed as their full self, that they can thrive in some of the ways that Jamie showed us with his statistics, that people who are recognized and understood and referred to and loved and affirmed as their gender identity, those are people who have the opportunity to really thrive and feel joy. So that's a lot of information. I'm going to take a sip of water, and then I'll dive into some of the terms. On that bottom axis of gender identity, we see terms like agender, gender fluid, gender queer, man, non-binary, and woman. And we see on that line connecting sex assigned at birth with gender identity, under the word cisgender, the word transgender. Trans is a Latin prefix that means across. So somebody whose sex assigned at birth is not in alignment with their gender identity might be considered or might call themselves transgender. And I think it's important to say that transgender does not mean hormones. It doesn't mean appearance. It doesn't mean surgery. It just means somebody whose inner understanding of themselves, who they know themselves to be in relationship to their gender, is not in alignment with their sex assigned at birth. And so there's a bunch of terms on the bottom axis of the triangle that one might use to describe their gender. And then you see two words at the bottom of the screen that I think are the most two important words on this screen, which say and more. Because this is just a sampling of all of the identity terms that one might use to refer to themselves. So I'll define a couple of them, and then we have a terminology sheet that we'll share with you in case you're curious to learn more of them. Agender is somebody who, a Latin prefix meaning without, right, is somebody who does not ascribe or identify with any of the genders. Somebody who is gender fluid might experience their gender as shifting or changing over time. Gender queer, I want to pause for a minute because I want to name the word queer. Queer is a word that's had a very long past. It is a term that was derogatory. And for some people, when they hear the word, it does bring up a lot of emotion, a lot of maybe shame or anger because of the way it was used against the LGBTQ community in the past. It is a word that has been reclaimed, and it is an umbrella term that encompasses many aspects of gender identity and sexual orientation. So it's the only word that we'll see on both of the bottom axes of the triangle when I go to the next slide. And because we know it's been reclaimed, if you use the term with love and it's a desire to affirm, you are invited to use it. And I said on the couple slides back that I wasn't going to give you a vocabulary quiz tonight. And I said it in jest because I used to be an English teacher and I don't feel like doing any grading tonight. But I actually said it for a much more important reason. Each one of these words has a dictionary definition. We will send you our terminology sheet. You can memorize all of the definitions, but each of these words also describes an individual, quite possibly an individual who you love very much. And each individual is going to use the term that feels right for them. And it may or may not match the exact dictionary definition on our terminology sheet, or that I just offered to you, or that somebody else uses. But it's really important that we learn the terms that the people that we love and care about, and even the people that we just maybe don't love as much, but we know, right? We want to know the terms that each person uses for themselves so that we can make sure we're using the term that affirms their identity. Just the same way, each of us on this Zoom has a word that we use about our gender identity, even if we haven't really thought about it very much. And we want to make sure that we're using the term that you want, just the way we want to make sure we're using the term that everyone else wants. It's a lot of information given very quickly. Before I move on to sexual orientation, I just wanted to ask Rebecca, were there any clarifying questions that came up, or anything, Jamie, that I missed that you wished I had said?
I think we're all good as it relates to this.
Amazing. And I'm the kind of person who thinks of the question that I want to ask 20 minutes later when we've changed the topic. You are welcome to come back at any point and ask the question. Sexual orientation, we at Keshet, we define sexual orientation in a way that's really important to me. We define it as whether, how, and to whom we experience physical or emotional attraction. And I think that that's really important because oftentimes that asexual identity gets ignored. So reminding people that whether someone experiences physical or romantic attraction is an important thing. I mean, asexual people don't even get a letter on the acronym, right? So we want to make sure we remind people that that is a valid and real sexual orientation. And so if you've had somebody in your life for a long time who, you've always wanted to fix up because we're such a matchmaking culture and they've resisted over time, it might be that they are asexual and they just haven't felt comfortable or safe sharing that with you. Maybe not. I don't want to make assumptions, but I just want to name that that is a sexual orientation. Other words on this you might be more familiar with: bisexual, gay, or lesbian. Queer, we talked about, is an umbrella term that sort of encompasses all of these terms. In the desire to name our identities, we've come up with a lot of terms. And when you have all the terms, it's a beautiful thing, but you're still kind of putting everyone in a box. And some people really don't like that idea of putting people in a box. So the idea of queer holds a lot of different versions of LGBTQ plus identity and offers a term that holds a variety of them. Pansexual means somebody who is attracted to all genders. And then straight is somebody who is heterosexual. Other questions on this slide? Okay. So a reminder that these terms, there's a lot of them, and they describe people. And the underlying message I think that Jamie and I want to send to you is that we want to respect, uplift, appreciate, and celebrate people. And so making sure we're using the terms that the folks that we care about are asking us to use is the end goal. And it's okay to ask. If you ask with love and a desire, to appreciate and celebrate someone. So, supporting and advocating for LGBTQ plus youth. Jamie, I will turn it over to you. Oh, I'm sorry. I got confused because I was wondering why that slide was there. I thought the section on language is next. We are on language and we will get to the supporting in just a moment. I apologize for the confusion. So a reminder that death and life are in the power of the tongue. I often tell a story. When I was in the 5th grade, there was a little boy at school, and every day when I got to school, he would tell me horrible things about myself. And when you show up every day at school and somebody tells you horrible things about yourself, you begin to believe them. Like, I thought there must be something really wrong with me. It wasn't until I was a lot older and I had some therapy that I understood, right, that it really wasn't about me. It was about him. But his words were intended to hurt me, right? They really were intended to make me feel smaller. And yet sometimes, even when we intend to do beautiful and kind and loving things with our words, they can still bring some pain. And so just bringing some awareness and some recognition to the way that we use our vocabulary, the way that we use our language, and how powerful that can be in somebody's life, I think is very important. So for example, you may have been raised that it was very polite, maybe not even just polite, but appropriate and expected that you would refer to people as Mrs. and Mr. or ma'am and sir. And many times those are appropriate and polite honorifics or salutations. And they're not always. So when we are addressing people who we don't know their gender identity, or we don't know the terms that they like to use, or when we're addressing a large crowd of people that might be comprised of all different kinds of people holding all different kinds of gender identities, we might want to think about terms that are more expansive and inclusive. So the yellow boxes in the middle of the screen offer some of those choices. We have thanks, friends. Good morning, folks. Hello, everyone. I've really leaned into folks, right? I love that. It doesn't roll off everyone's tongue. So a reminder that instead of saying, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, you could actually use the terms in the yellow boxes without the specified term. Thanks, have a great night. Good morning. These all work also without using the gendered language. And then we talked a little bit about pronouns in the statistics. Jamie was talking about how important pronouns can be. And Jamie and I used them when we introduced ourselves tonight. And maybe that's something you're very used to. Maybe that's something that caught you a little bit off guard because you haven't heard that before. We use them so that you know how to refer to us correctly. And we also do that because we don't want to assume that you should be able to recognize or know somebody's pronouns just by looking at them. Like I said before, we cannot assume identity by looking at somebody. Especially, I live in Florida, where it is illegal, if not impossible if not illegal, to obtain gender affirming care, where it is not safe to use restrooms in public places that don't match your sex assigned at birth. People are not always comfortable being out and being public with who they are. So if we look at somebody and make an assumption about their pronouns, we might refer to them incorrectly, and that can add on to those microaggressions that they experience that cause them to feel stigmatized. So I like to think about sharing pronouns as an act of allyship. When I share my pronouns, I'm opening space, I'm making space, I'm signaling to others that I am safe for them to tell me their pronouns. And then I can refer to them correctly, which allows me to ensure that they feel respected and supported by me. And so I'd like you to think about using your pronouns and sharing your pronouns as an act of allyship and all of the places that you can use them on your Zoom screen and your email signature, or your name tags. There's lots and lots of places. And then lastly, before I turn it back over to Jamie, we are human beings. We are going to make mistakes. That is just part of the daily way things go. We know that. We are not asking anyone to be perfect, but what we are asking for is to, I mean, you already understand why this is important because you came here tonight, right? We know that you're supportive and already somebody who cares about this, but a reminder, right, that this is so powerful and so meaningful. And so if you do make the mistake, don't make it about you. Don't make a big deal. Just correct yourself and move on.
Thanks so much, Tracy. And I wanted to add a small, tiny anecdote about language. I love those slides so much, and they are so important, not just because of the statistics that I shared earlier, but because even as like a grown LGBTQ person in my 30s, I still remember how much harder it felt to come out to my family. And I was aware that I'm gay when I was like 14, and it took 7 years to officially formally come out to my own parents. And part of what made that so complicated was just language assumptions like any boys you have a crush on at school. So are there any cute boys in your class? And this assumption of the gender, so using gendered language to ask me questions about who I'm interested in made me feel, so even though they weren't misgendering me, but they were misgendering my potential prospects for romance. And that itself made it so much harder to come out and was so painful. And and I didn't know how to articulate that. I didn't know how to correct them. So that's why mindfulness around language is so incredibly powerful. It really not only makes someone feel safe and affirmed, but it also sets them up for feeling maybe like they have more access and trust to us when they do decide to share who they are. So we learn from the sages in our Talmud that study is greater than action, but only because study leads to action. And so I want to take some time together to essentially study some of the best practices that we recommend, that we learn from many of the youth that we work with, and also that we know from our own lived experiences as LGBTQ folks, for how y'all as parents and caregivers, as affirming adults and young LGBTQ lives, can essentially show up in conversation and show up for folks when they decide to bring you into a deeper understanding of who they are. So with that, we can go to the next slide. So as parents and caregivers, we can, and I'm going to put these in like 4 buckets, and there's so many things we can do within this, and we're going to unpack especially the first 2. We can actively listen. We can use affirming language, like the language that Tracy just covered. We can seek out learning opportunities. So we can take some of the burden of teaching off of the young folks in our lives, and we can go to amazing webinars. Well, I hope you think it's amazing. You can let us know afterwards and be honest. You can go to webinars like this and learning opportunities like this. You can do research and reach out to other folks in your communities, but seeking out learning opportunities so that we can be constantly on a journey of growth and understanding about LGBTQ identities and experiences. And then finally, seeking community for ourselves. Sometimes this work can feel hard. Sometimes in general, just being human, showing up for the folks in our lives can feel hard or stressful. We might be experiencing grief, or we just want to know that we're not alone in our questions, or alone in feeling triumphant in the job that we're doing. And that's where it's so important to seek out community for ourselves so that we can be supported laterally together as a community. We can go to the next slide. Oh, wow, we had fun little slide animation. Wow, what a throwback to middle school. I think I put that in there a long time ago and forgot that it was there. So some of the ways that we can show up when someone comes out, and I want to offer a different framing on coming out, because we have this, we still live in a society where the assumption is that one must come out as LGBTQ+, meaning that we assume that unless someone comes out, they are cisgender and straight. One, we need to do away with that. We really need to dismantle that. And I know we're all here and active partners in doing that. And so I want to offer a different framing that I think is more representative of our experiences as LGBTQ folks. And that is that it's less about coming out and more about bringing you into our understanding, or our evolving understanding of who we are. And sometimes by the time we come out to the folks who are closest to us, we've potentially already tried this out with other folks. We might have come out to friends. We might have come out to teachers. We might have come out to strangers. We might have tested that out in other waters. And so at this point, we're really bringing you in. It might not be the first time that we are actually sharing this information with you or with other folks. And it might be the first time we are sharing this information with anyone who is not ourselves. So something that is really key for us to do when someone brings us into a deeper understanding of who they are is to really listen to what this means to them. If they use the words coming out, what does that mean to them? For some folks, it can be exciting and triumphant, and we want to respond with excitement and triumph in response. We want to be enthusiastic. For some folks, it might feel really fraught and worrisome. They might be wrestling with feelings of shame or fear. And so we want to be able to meet them with comfort and support. We want to be able to show up in ways that help dissolve those fears. And for still other folks, it can be anticlimactic intentionally. They might be like, it's not a big deal. I'm just letting you know what this is and who I am. And that's it. And we want to also affirm that and normalize that and say, great, thanks so much for letting me know. And that's one strategy that I think is really important, that to demonstrate that we are listening and that we are a trusted person in this person's life, starting with gratitude. Thank you so much for sharing this with me. I think it's a really powerful way to ensure that folks know that they are safe in this space with us. We also want to center the need of the person coming out to us, or like I said, bringing us in. So we might initially on the inside feel a kind of way. We might experience a different emotional reaction to what they're sharing. We might be confused. We might be shocked. There might be some feelings of, I don't know, our understanding feeling disrupted of, I'm so confused. This is surprising. This came out of nowhere for me. We might be feeling these things on the inside. And I want to urge us to actually compartmentalize that so that we can center the person in front of us. Rather than centering it on our questions, on our reactions, let's center the person in front of us on what this conversation means to them, what they need from this conversation, and how they can feel supported. And sometimes that can look like congratulating them and saying mazel tov, or otherwise matching the tone of where they're at. And I think another important piece of this too is actually checking in about privacy and confidentiality. We want to check in and actually determine, is this information that you want to stay between us? Are there other folks who are in our common circles or in our family together that already know that you want me to share this information with, or that you don't want me to share this information with? We can ask someone, what feels good in terms of whether or how I share this information? And they might say a whole host of different responses. And I think being posed the question itself, though, is a really empowering experience for someone to know that you are actually allowing them to lead this part of their journey. And that's one of the most important pieces of coming out or bringing folks in, is really feeling like we have the power and control of our own experiences, because it can feel so disempowering and frightening when we are outed against our will. And with that, it's also important to check in. Maybe check in towards the end of these conversations, or check in even in the middle and say, I just want to check in. How are you feeling? How are you doing? Or checking in later. Like, I really appreciated the conversation that we had the other day, and I wanted to check in. How are you doing? When we check in and circle back about how someone is feeling, especially if they haven't verbalized how they've been feeling during the course of a conversation or over a stretch of days, that can be really empowering and supportive and affirming. And we're also recognizing again and maintaining the relationship, and recognizing again that the importance of them feeling centered in this experience. And of course, we want to remember that this person is still the same person we knew before. Some of the reactions some of the teens in our programs have shared with us is that folks will say, I feel like I have lost X, Y, or Z when they come out to the adults in their lives. And some people will say, I'm just so confused. I feel like I don't know you. You actually do know them, but now you know them more deeply. You know more aspects of who they are. But that doesn't mean that everything that came before was somehow not also real and important, that everything in your relationship before is somehow a facade. It's not. It's just that there was a part of themselves that they weren't at the point of bringing you in yet. And what an honor it is that now they are at that point of bringing you in. And by the way, when folks do sometimes come out to other folks first, like sometimes folks will come out to Keshet staff before they share who they are with families, it's because we're lower stakes. It's not because we're more important. We're not. It's because they experience us as slightly lower risk and lower stakes. Our opinions don't matter nearly as much as yours do. And our reactions wouldn't matter nearly as much as yours do. And that's an important piece to understand, is sometimes it can feel like a shock if we feel like we are some of the last folks to know. And usually that is because folks were building up their sense of confidence and resilience around this. And we can go to the next slide. Some ways not to respond. Like I said earlier, basically, let's not do the converse of everything that I just said. Let us not downplay what this is. Oh, it's no big deal. Oh, I figured. Again, unless they're saying it's no big deal and you're like, great, I agree. Otherwise, let's not downplay it. Let's match the person where they're at in what this means to them. Again, we're not putting ourselves at the center, we're putting this person at the center. And then let's also be really careful of potential microaggressions. Avoiding questions like, are you going to do a real complete transition? How or when? Or what does this mean in terms of surgery? Are you going to want this now? Or, but you said you were this last summer. What body parts do you have? Which for our family members, we may already feel like we're in the know, but maybe we don't with some of their friends, some of the folks that they're bringing into our homes, some of the young folks that we might work with in different settings. And isn't that kind of young to be making this kind of decision? Oh, I got that one myself. And every time I read it, I'm just like, come on. I was right then and I'm right now. And when we say this, what we're essentially doing is we are undermining how true and real this is for the person in front of us. Even if the terms and descriptors we use to describe ourselves change down the road, that's okay. So does our understanding of who we are. It doesn't matter if someone used words in the past that they don't use now. Again, we're centering this person in this moment. And if we're feeling any of these questions or reactions, that's where we can lean on other supports. Instead of bringing it into this space in this special holy conversation, let's bring it into some of our other spaces where we can receive support and where we can, instead of burdening the person in front of us, we can actually just rely on other educators or rely on other folks to hold that with us while we navigate these different questions. And we can go to the next slide. I know time is very precious. So I'm just going to invite folks, if you'd like to read just to yourself, and I'll just highlight a couple of these. I won't read them all out loud because time is short. But we asked some young folks what their families did well, like what they felt their families did well in terms of showing up for them as LGBTQ folks. They shared that their families corrected other family members and that their family members themselves expected to be corrected, that there was this understanding of a growth and learning mindset that was ongoing, that their family gently reminded people in order to prevent confusion or misunderstanding, and that folks asked open-ended questions in a non-judgmental way. And you can see some of those samples of questions too. And Tracy, I'm sure we can also send this out to folks too if y'all want to have it in your back pocket for anything. And we can go to the next slide. And then here were some responses to the prompt of what could your family have done better? And some folks shared really some really true and heartbreaking examples that harken back to what I just shared of what's best not to do. And that is downplaying, so writing it off as a phase. That's another piece of misgendering, not using affirming language. Others insisting that they behave or dress in a particular way, using a name that they no longer use. So again, not using affirming language. Using gender-specific adjectives. Buying gifts that they didn't want. And using gender stereotypes in the ways that they were interacting with them. So again, we can learn so much. There's so much wisdom just on these two slides from youth that we can learn so much when we center the young person in front of us and really let them guide what's feeling best for them. They are our best teachers when it comes to how to show up. And we want to be mindful of not expecting them to do the teaching themselves. And that's why we have amazing spaces like this. And that's why we're so glad that you're here. So that's enough from me. We should open it up for questions.
As Jamie said, we will we'll offer BBYO a PDF of this slide deck, as well as the link that this QR code links to if you would like to evaluate us, which we would appreciate. And like I said earlier, we'll include that terminology sheet. I think for now, well, I'll leave this up for a second, and then I can always take down the screen share if that's better for questions. But Rebecca and Drew, we'll turn it over to you.
Amazing. Tracy, Jamie, just want to say first and foremost, thank you to you both. I always love being in the room. I always learn from you. I always learn something new just from listening. And so just thank you both for your time and for the energy that you've brought into the room tonight. I am very, very grateful. And I wanted to ask, you led off with some really, Jamie, as you said, kind of shocking and a little bit scary statistics about, the mental health of our LGBTQ plus teens. And, I'm curious, looking at the landscape of the world right now, right? How can adults best approach conversations about mental health with their LGBTQ plus identifying teens, especially, those who may be hesitant to seek help or who they may be worried about?
One of the, I'm sorry, I was pausing well, Drew, you were also a clinician, so you're also more than welcome to jump in. I think some of the, and please do, I think some of the um, important pieces that I hold on to is to really normalize how we talk in general in our communities about mental health and wellness. So even just modeling for ourselves, like when we actually model for ourselves that we are telling a young person that I was feeling really stressed out, so I took a break yesterday and I just took care of myself. So first of all, when we need a culture shift around normalization and around validation of the universal experience of mental health and wellness. That's one piece. And then I think another piece too is when we engage in learning opportunities that explore mental health and explore things like planning for coping mechanisms, of identifying different things that people can do when they are feeling X, Y, or Z. So when they are feeling stressed, when they are feeling overwhelmed, when they are feeling like they want to withdraw from a situation. And when we actually participate in learning opportunities like activities in a classroom or even together as a family of we're going on a vacation and traveling together, let's each come up with 5 things we can do for when we are feeling stressed or really mad at each other. We can do these activities, and that's also part of the way of, 1, identifying individual coping mechanisms, but 2, normalizing conversations about this, which can make it easier to ask for help. And then couched in that, I think it's always important to plug some of the free and confidential resources that are out there for young folks to be able to rely on, which can make it feel lower stakes because there's no chance of it being traced back to them or their families, like the Trevor Project, Trans Teen Lifeline, Trans Teen Chat, and Crisis Text as well. So Crisis Text Line. So there are some really amazing free and confidential resources that I think having around, even having on a magnet, can be pretty key. But feel free to add whatever you want.
Yeah. And I think, Rebecca, one of the things that we'll make sure to do before everyone leaves tonight is we'll drop in BBYO's created a resource sheet for really all of our teens, our parents, our families that have some of those numbers, but not the Trans Lifeline. So I'll have to ask you for that one, Jamie, if you can drop it in the chat for everybody. But has some of those numbers there for you all to be able to take back to your teens or to those loved ones in your lives. You know, I think Tracy, you touched on this, Jamie, you talked about this a little bit, but like the idea of how important language is, and how important, you know, not making assumptions about a teen's sexual orientation, their gender identity. So before we talk a little bit about, you know, having teens be more aware of their language and accepting, how can the adults really be more inclusive in their language and really avoid making assumptions about our teens?
Yeah, I mean, such a great question. I think that so often, like, we are just in like go mode. And so we don't take the time to maybe stop and think about either what we're saying or the impact of what we're saying. And so I just really encourage people to start paying very close attention to the words and like a lot of the sayings that we refer to or we rely on or we just kind of use in general, like manning a table or like some of that kind of old or gendered language that we maybe don't even realize that we're using. But once you start to pay attention to it, you will begin to notice more and more where it's popping up. And when you, for example, I don't love the term guys. When somebody refers to me, hey guys, like that doesn't land well for me. And so many people are like, well, that's just a word I use all the time. I don't even think about it. And maybe it can be hard initially, maybe that word, maybe another one. But once we start to pay attention to the language we're using and really think deeply about it, and maybe even go Google a term or look it up or ask a youth or a friend or somebody in your lives about, you know, to be an accountability partner and just check each other for language that we're using. I think what Jamie said about not assuming our kids are straight or cisgender until they tell us otherwise is a really, really big one. I mean, that's a big culture shift that we're really trying to help move along, so that we ask our kids about friends or partners, or we just let them know that we're like open, like we could talk about our own lives or people that we care about, or just modeling for them that, you know, there isn't one expected way that we want them to turn out, right? We don't have like we as parents oftentimes like have a vision for what we think our kids should be. And then we expect our kid to be that. And there's a lot of pressure on that kid if they do not fit in. Like my mom definitely expected me to be a certain way. And until we could get to terms with the fact that I was not that way, it was a rough going for a while. But once we were able to reshape and reframe that idea of what was expected versus who we actually were, and to find joy in the idea that my turning out the way that I was going to be was way more exciting than my not living up to an expectation, was really, really powerful. So lots of answers because it's such a rich question.
I love what you said, and I love the idea of, how do we make space for whomever that teen is and however they want to be that incredible self that they are. I also think, Tracy, you touched on, this is such a DC thing, but during the Obama years, the folks was such a hot one that I think people started using again and again and again, and we heard come up a lot. I always get made fun of. Mine is friends. I love the word friends. Everybody is a friend, right? And so you will hear me use that all the time, or y'all. I'm from Baltimore. It's fine. I can say y'all. But folks and friends and y'all, and just how we really harness that language as an empowering thing. I find it empowering even for me to be able to really harness that language, to use pronouns, right? All of those different pieces that I think just help us to create a space where teens can show up as their authentic self, and that matters in terms of who they are and who they become. And as we look at that, I don't know if you all have heard this or seen this, but every now and again, and especially recently, I've seen, sometimes from teens, that language show up that isn't so great, that isn't so inclusive, or that, even maybe stigmatizing, or using language that can ostracize. So how do we help teens be better peers? And really, as parents, not just wag our fingers at our kids, but like show up in a way that encourages them to be their best self and bring others in, as opposed to keeping others out.
I don't want to blame this one on the parents, because I think that kids have so many influences that impact their lives. But I think that we also need to look at the way that we talk about other communities or other groups or other individuals, and know that our kids learn very closely from the way that we interact and the way that we use language, and also all the media influence that they get, and who do they follow and who do they pay attention to and who are they reading about and listening to. Maybe they're not reading as much as I would like them to be, but anyhow, maybe they are. Right. And so what are the influences that they're getting, and who are they getting them from? And how can we so much of this is about communication. How can we communicate to them, hey, I realized the other day I said this thing and that did not come out the way that I wanted. And I would like to offer a correction, modeling that vulnerability. Or, hey, I heard you listening to that comedian the other day and they said something and that really did not sit right with me. And I want to know how that felt for you. And can we talk this through? And once we learn that it's okay to have conversations about what we're learning and hearing and consuming, before we begin to repeat it without paying attention to it, I think so much of this is about just a really cognizant practice. But Jamie, I'm doing all the talking, so I want to hear what you have to say.
All of that, I think modeling is key. And one other thing that I would recommend too is sometimes when, and I think about this when young folks might say something extreme, like, I just wanna, like, I don't know, like hurt myself. Like when someone is really upset and like feeling a kind of way, checking in at a either in the moment or at a time when maybe they're less de-escalated, if this is coming from a place of emotional escalation of using some anti-LGBTQ language, or non-affirming language, but checking in and saying, I wanted to check in earlier, you said this, and I wanted to hear more. Where was that coming from? And one, it might just be a shock of, you think it was coming from anywhere, like I was just using slang, but that might be like oh yikes, like what is this? What message am I sending? What do you mean you think this is coming from? Or it might be coming from somewhere real. It might become, and they might be opening up with you about where this is coming from and what they are feeling. So sometimes having those conversations, and I don't think it'll be like a miracle and work all the time. I think it's conversations that need to be revisited often. And maybe then there will be that moment where there's more of a sharing, but modeling that I'm noticing your language and I'm going to be checking in with you about it because I care about you and I want to understand you and understand where you're coming from.
I
Yeah,
just
and
want to lift up something Jamie said really quickly. Jamie didn't say, you shouldn't have said this. Jamie said, I want to ask you about that. And I think even that framing is so important.
Yeah, I was gonna call that out too, Tracy, because you did it as well when you were speaking, which is like, how do we not blame, shame, call out, but actually question respectfully, right? As we look at our teens, as we look at, anybody, how do we sort of invite the conversation and open it up and use those, I love WH questions. I love open-ended questions. Talk to a forensic interviewer any day about that stuff. But I think as we look at, right, all of those different pieces, how do we invite the conversation? And also, how do we take ownership when we do wrong? And I think that's such an important piece for us to take away from tonight. Thank you, Jamie and Tracy, for that really meaningful conversation. I really it really does. As I said before, I learn every time. If you are interested in continuing a conversation about your teen or your family's experience, Keshet is offering office hours next Tuesday night on May 14th at 8 p.m. Eastern. And you can find the link in the chat to sign up and or in our emails as well following up. Thank you to all of you for joining us tonight. And across the year for these incredible conversations on supporting our teens. We look forward to seeing you at future virtual programs in the fall and wish all of you a wonderful end to the academic year. If your teen doesn't have plans for summer yet, there are still spots available at our incredible BBYO summer programs, and we hope to see them. You can visit bbyosummer.org to learn more all about those programs. And I wish you all a wonderful evening. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.